Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali and today I'd once again like to address codependency in relationships. Now I'd like to address this aspect primarily because of two reasons. Firstly, a few people had gotten in touch with me and asked me to address codependency through an example. And secondly, I also happened to hear this song from Ashiki 2, Hum Tere Bin Kahin Reh Nahi Sakte. Tere bina kya wajood mera. And as beautiful and as romantic and as desirable that may sound, it helped me reflect on the codependent aspects of our relationships. Not just romantic ones, but even otherwise. Now, before I take up this particular movie as an example of what codependent relationships look like and the way they function, I'd like to take up a few lines from a psychologist, Sean Megan Byrne, who states, codependency is an imbalanced relationship pattern where one partner assumes a high cost always of a giver or a rescuer role. Which means that this one particular person is always the provider, the giver, and the rescuer. And quite naturally, when in a relationship, the other becomes the taker or the victim, or in fact, plays the role of the taker and the victim. She further goes on to state, it's an addictive relationship pattern which originates in its formative foundation years, which essentially means our childhood. And from my understanding, a child is quite naturally a codependent in a relationship biologically and developmentally. For we know that out of all of the mammalian species on this planet, human babies are dependent on their caretakers for the most and the longest part of their lifetimes. We are the only mammals who take the longest to sit and even to stand. And therefore, quite naturally, we are the takers in the caretaker or in the parent-child dynamic. And I think it's equally important to mention here that it's also a societal construct, wherein we call our life partner as our better half or even ardhangani for that matter. And maybe the concept of the other half or ardhangani could have had a romantic inclination to that. Or maybe it was equally true when kids were married off at a very young age. So quite naturally, they were still kids who were in the process of development and therefore had to be taken care of by somebody else, who quite naturally assumed the role of the giver, the rescuer, the provider in the relationship. Now, exactly like how a tree originates from the seed, which then needs to be tended and nurtured to by a farmer or by a caretaker, the origin of the man, or rather the human being, is always the child, is always through the developmental years of the childhood, of the formative foundation years. And codependency becomes a pattern with individuals who as children had either been too protected or too neglected, who as children were not given enough space, or who as children were given too much space. These are also the parents or the caretakers who are also called as the helicopter parents or the absent parents. And both of these two extremes lay the foundation of creating codependent patterns in our relationships. So let's take up an example to demonstrate codependency in relationships, and not just romantic relationships, but in many, many relationships. And this was aptly, insightfully and beautifully showcased through the movie Dil Dhadakne Do. The movie directed by Zoya Akhtar. Now in this movie we see that the husband and the wife have a pretty dysfunctional relationship. The husband, Anil Kapoor, is always criticizing his wife. He is almost always body shaming her. He is almost always telling her her position in the family. And in his perception, she is just his trophy wife. And maybe even a trophy which he is not proud to flaunt. But maybe a trophy which keeps the portrait of the family picture complete. He is also somebody who has had numerous affairs throughout his marriage. And yet his wife pretends as if she is unaware or that there's nothing wrong with the family. with his flings or affairs. And through many instances in the movie, we come to know that the wife is sticking on in the marriage, tolerating the marriage, tolerating the relationship with her husband, just to keep herself and her image safe, in keeping with the family image, in keeping with the family portrait. Wherein at one point in time, she also advises her daughter to take a back step from her business, because in her opinion, it's just a hobby that her daughter is engaging in, and that she should let her husband be her caretaker. It's also towards the end that this realization hits hard, wherein her son actually tells her that we all know what dad's business trips have been all about, and you're just sticking around and tolerating him because you have no other place to go. We also see this dynamics played out in the parent-child relationship, in the friendships and the romantic relationships as well. An undertone of codependency is also showcased between Priyanka Chopra and her husband Rahul Bose, wherein neither partners appreciate each other, wherein neither partners are growing in the relationship, wherein neither partners are engaged in the relationship, but are able to put up a good public facade, are able to create the image of a perfect happy couple. The codependency is also projected out in friendships. The codependency is also projected out in the parent-child relationship, wherein the father is trying to use and bribe his son to marry someone against his own wishes, so that the father can then establish a business association with the other person, with the girl's father. The mother also is trying to buy the son's affection by bribing him with an aircraft that he can own. We also see the exhibition of codependency in friendships and in other alliances too, wherein two youngsters who actually want to be together, who actually want to get married and care for each other, are lying to their own parents, are lying to everyone else to escape their parents' wrath, to escape their parents' displeasure. And we'd also notice that in relationships fostered by codependency, there is an underlying factor of shame, of blame, of feeling helpless, of feeling stuck, of feeling neglected, of feeling angry, and of feeling resentment, primarily towards the others, but also towards one's own self. In these kind of dynamics, we might experience sympathy towards the others, but there's a lack of empathy towards the others. There's a lack of compassion on both interpersonal and intrapersonal levels. And unfortunately, in my understanding, all of this is happening at a very unconscious, subconscious level. Like we said earlier, it's an addictive relationship pattern, which quite naturally also means that like every addiction, every other time that we repeat the pattern, we would need a little more dosage of that. We would need the same kind of reactivity to play our role in that dynamic, which invariably means that the other will also have to play their role in the dynamic. And unless we reflect and contemplate on these dynamics, within these dynamics of the relationship patterns that play out on both intrapersonal and interpersonal levels, the cycle of addiction will keep perpetuating itself, not only vertically but even horizontally, as is beautifully and very consciously demonstrated through this movie. Let's try and become aware of our own maladaptive patterns. Let's try and unlearn these patterns, which reminds me of a quote that at times, unlearning is the highest form of learning. At times, it's the greatest gift that we can give to ourselves and all those we care about. Let's try and reflect on that a little more, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contents of my videos, please do like, share and subscribe.